Why the fear of death is fooling you into wanting to live forever, all right? Let's jump straight into it. This video is going to challenge something deep inside you, something that, whether you know it or not, is probably shaping the way you live your fear of death. We all have it to some degree. The thought of our lives coming to an end, of our existence ceasing, terrifies us. And because of that fear, many of us harbor a secret, or not so secret desire to live forever. But what if I told you that fear of death is fooling you? What if I told you that your desire to live forever isn't really about living at all, but about running away from something you can't escape? Let's break this down. First, ask yourself, why do we fear death? Is it because we value life so much, or is it because we don't fully understand what life or death really is? Most of us fear death because we associate it with the unknown. We can't imagine not existing. We can't imagine a world where we don't wake up, where our thoughts stop, where we simply aren't. It feels like the ultimate loss, right? But that fear is based on an assumption that death is something to be avoided, something inherently bad. And because we fear it, we convince ourselves that the solution is to live forever, to keep the lights on indefinitely, so to speak. But here's the kicker: the desire to live forever isn't born from a love of life. It's born from the fear of losing it. And fear is a terrible motivator for a good life. Let me ask you a deep question. If you woke up tomorrow and knew for sure that you were going to live forever, would that really make your life better, or would it make it worse? Think about it. If you had an infinite amount of time, would anything you do really matter? Would there be any urgency to experience, to grow, to change? Or would you slip into a kind of existential laziness, always putting off the meaningful things because, well, you have forever to get to them? What we often overlook is that the very finiteness of life, the fact that it will end, is what gives it meaning. Imagine playing a video game with infinite lives and no end goal. At first, it might seem fun. You can take your time, explore everything, try out all the possibilities. But eventually, without any stakes, without any risk of losing, the game would become boring. It would lose its meaning. In the same way, life's value comes from the fact that you don't have forever. You have this moment right now, and that's what makes it precious.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
But let's take this even further. Why do we assume that living forever would be desirable in the first place? Is it really the continuation of life that we want, or is it just the avoidance of death? And if it's the latter, then we're not really chasing life, we're just running from something we don't understand. Think about it. What would living forever actually look like? If you could live forever, would you still be the same person? Or would the endless passage of time change you so much that you'd eventually lose the very essence of who you are? If your memories stretched across centuries, would they still hold the same emotional weight? Here's a thought experiment for you. Imagine you live forever, and in that eternity you forget who you were, who you loved, what you cared about. Would that still be you living forever? Or would you become a stranger to yourself, a hollow shell, continuing on without any real sense of identity or purpose? You see, the fear of death tricks us into thinking that endless life is the solution. But in reality, it's the very limits of life that give it meaning. The fact that we're going to die one day is what pushes us to love, to create, to seek joy, and to connect with others. Without death, life loses its edge. It becomes flat, unremarkable, and endless in a way that strips it of all significance. So in a way, by fearing death and longing for eternal life, we're actually fooling ourselves into missing out on the very things that make life worth living. But here's a deeper question: what if death isn't the opposite of life, but a part of it? What if, instead of thinking of death as the end of something, we saw it as a crucial piece of the whole mosaic? After all, every living thing on this planet dies. It's the natural cycle. Birth, growth, decay, death, it's all interconnected. Without death, there's no room for new life, no space for new experiences, no evolution or progress. Death isn't something to be feared, it's something to be understood, even embraced. That's the paradox of the fear of death. It convinces us to want something that, in the end, would strip life of its meaning. It pushes us to seek immortality, when in truth, immortality would trap us in a life that no longer feels alive. So instead of fearing death, maybe we should focus on living not forever, but fully. The illusion of immortality, while living forever, would be a curse, not a gift. We've touched on something deeply profound. The fear of death makes us long for eternal life. But what if immortality isn't the blessing we think it is? Let's dig deeper into this idea, because this is where things get really interesting. Imagine this: you've been granted the gift of immortality. The fear of death is gone, and now you have infinite time ahead of you. At first, it seems like the ultimate freedom. You can do anything, experience everything, learn endlessly. But here's the catch: what happens after the first 100 years? The first 1,000? The first million? Think about the things that give life its richness: relationships, achievements, growth, love, even suffering. These things take place within a limited time frame. They have a beginning and an end. They matter because you don't have an unlimited number of chances to experience them. The very fact that time is ticking is what gives these moments their intensity. You fall in love knowing that life is short, and that makes the love deeper. You work hard toward a goal because you know your time is finite, and that makes the achievement sweeter. But now, with immortality, all of that fades. If you knew you had endless time, what would motivate you to do anything? Would you still cherish the fleeting beauty of a sunset if you knew you could watch an infinite number of them? Would you still find joy in the small things if you had all the time in the universe to experience them? Here's a question for you: would immortality actually make you happier, or would it slowly drain away the joy and meaning from your life? The problem with living forever is that life itself, as we know it, is built on cycles, beginnings and endings, growth and decay, joy and sorrow. Without those cycles, without the contrast between life and death, existence becomes monotonous. The things you once found meaningful would lose their value because there would be no urgency, no scarcity of time to give them depth. Immortality might sound like an escape from death, but in reality, it's an escape from life itself. And here's the deeper issue: who would you become if you lived forever? Over time, the person you are today would fade. Your memories would blur, your relationships would grow distant, and eventually you might not even recognize yourself. Would you still be you after 1,000 years, or would you have become someone entirely different, shaped by endless time? This brings us to a powerful philosophical idea: identity is tied to change, and change is tied to death. We grow because we know our time is limited. We strive, we love, we create, because we know that one day it will all end. Immortality would freeze us in a kind of existential limbo, where we don't truly grow because there's no consequence, no end, no urgency. Over time, you might find that the very thing you sought, eternal life, has drained the meaning out of your existence. Now, let me ask you something: if living forever would lead to a life stripped of meaning, could it be that death isn't something to fear, but something to accept? Could it be that death, rather than robbing us of life, is actually what gives life its value? When we let go of the fear of death, we stop clinging to the illusion that immortality is the answer. We start to see that it's the limits of life, the fact that it ends, that make it precious. Mortality would rob us of the very thing that makes life worth living, the fact that it doesn't last forever. So, instead of longing for endless time, maybe we should focus on making the most of the time we have. Instead of fearing death, maybe we should embrace it as the natural completion of the cycle of life. Because in the end, it's not the number of years we live that matters, it's how we live them. The beauty of mortality, how death makes life worth living. So now we've questioned the allure of immortality. But let's flip this around. What if death isn't an enemy to be feared, but rather an essential part of what makes life beautiful? That's a tough pill to swallow, I know. But when you really think about it, it's death that injects urgency, purpose, and meaning into our lives. Without death, time becomes endless, and with endless time, everything loses its value. But because we know our time is limited, we're pushed to make the most of it. Imagine if you had all the time in the world to do anything. Would you still chase your dreams with the same passion? Would you still fight for your relationships, knowing that there's always an infinite tomorrow? Mortality gives us focus. It reminds us that time is precious, and that we need to live fully in the moments we have. The knowledge that we won't live forever forces us to prioritize what truly matters: love, connection, growth. It makes us ask the hard questions: what kind of life do I want to live? How do I want to be remembered? What legacy do I want to leave behind? Now, let me pose a deep question to you. If death didn't exist, would you even care about those things? Or would you endlessly put off the things that really matter because you had forever to get to them? Would the urgency to live fully disappear? Here's where it gets interesting. Knowing that life is finite doesn't just make us more driven, it makes us more present. When you realize that each moment could be your last, you start to live more mindfully. You savor the small things. You stop taking the everyday experiences for granted, and you start to see the beauty in them. The laughter of a friend, the warmth of the sun, the feeling of accomplishment after hard work. These things mean more because they won't last forever. Death, in this sense, isn't the end of life. It's the frame that gives life its shape. It's the contrast that makes every experience, every moment, more vibrant. So instead of fearing death, maybe we should see it as the ultimate reminder to live fully, love deeply, and embrace the present. Maybe the real trick isn't living forever, but living in a way that makes the time you have meaningful. The art of letting go, accepting mortality to truly live. We've come to the final piece of the puzzle. We've explored how the fear of death leads us to long for immortality, and how that desire can ultimately rob life of its meaning. Now, let's talk about what it really means to let go of that fear, to accept death not as something to dread, but as a natural part of life. Because here's the truth: only by accepting our mortality can we truly live. Letting go of the fear of death isn't about giving up on life. It's about embracing the fullness of life, knowing that it won't last forever. When we stop seeing death as an enemy, we stop living in a constant state of anxiety, always worrying about how much time we have left. Instead, we start to focus on the richness of the time we do have. Think about it: we can't control how long we'll live, but we can control how we spend our time. We can choose to live with intention, to engage with the world around us, and to create moments of meaning every day. When we accept that death is inevitable, we stop wasting time on things that don't matter. We stop putting off the things that truly make life worth living: love, passion, growth, and connection. Here's the deep question I want to leave you with: what would you do differently if you truly accepted that your life is finite? Would you love more fiercely? Would you take more risks, knowing that failure is part of the journey, but the journey itself is what matters? Would you spend more time with the people who matter, knowing that those moments are fleeting? By accepting death, we free ourselves from the illusion that life needs to be perfect or that we need to live forever to make it meaningful. Instead, we start to see life for what it is: a series of beautiful, imperfect moments that are precious precisely because they are temporary. So, let go of the fear. Let go of the illusion of immortality. Accept that death is part of the deal, and in doing so, you'll find that life becomes far richer, far more meaningful than you ever imagined. Because in the end, it's not about how long we live, but how deeply we live. Now, the question is, are you ready to truly live?